post-dogmatic age and the beginning of secular scientism. Now, I would like to formally apologize for this very cliche introduction, but let's be honest, we all knew I was gonna have to mention either God is dead, one must imagine Sisyphus happy, or there's but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide. I mean, is it really a mediocre philosophy YouTube video about meaning in life if I don't pick one of these overused quotes? So, God is dead. Instead of trusting a god to tell us why we are sick, why we sometimes hurt other people, we have medicine to explain how viruses travel, and psychology to explore the inner workings of our minds and emotions. Yay, free from the shackles of dogma. But secularism left us with a major problem. Science could tell us why we were sick and why we sometimes hurt other people, but it couldn't really tell us why? Like, what's the point of us getting sick? What's the point of hurting other people? Maybe to advantage ourselves and push our own goals forward? To endure hardship and be stronger as a result of it? But all that would matter only if we mattered. And why should we matter? We're just a speck in the middle of an unimaginably vast universe. We're all gonna die one day, and honestly, humanity has done lots of awful things to our environment. Do we even deserve to live? There have been some responses to these concerns though, so stick around for that. But essentially, there was this crisis in meaning because without a higher being rubbing our egos telling us you are the most important beings, people fell into nihilism. What if there is no meaning in life? However, and you can let me know if you disagree, I think there's been a shift from meaninglessness to insignificance. To explain this, we'll need to dive deep into this paper by Massimo Leon. Although it's about the meaning of signs and symbols rather than human value, I think it has so many interesting ideas that can be translated into talking about meaning in human existence. And what better way to start our discussion than riding a bus in Kyoto, Japan? But first, I am going to drop you down a flight of stairs. Yes, this video is sponsored by Casetify, and I'm about to do the drop test. Okay, gonna throw this case down these set of stairs. My phone better not break, or else I am gonna be really mad. 3, 2, 1. Oh my god. Oh my god. Is it okay? Yeah. Oh my god. Okay. Yay! I was able to pick 4 cases, so I got these 2 right here for myself, one for Vivian, my roommate. How do you like your new Casetify case?
I love Casetify.
And then one for my sister. They have so many prints and custom cases, I felt like I was scrolling forever. But honestly, what I love most is just how durable these cases are. I am a clumsy person, so I need that ultra protection, which is why I got the Ultra Impact case that offers drop protection up to 9.8 feet, and it doesn't feel bulky at all. The new Impact and Ultra Impact cases are also made of 65% recycled and plant-based materials. So, if you're in the mood for a new phone case, you can use the link in my description box to get 15% off your order. Now, according to this bus schedule, oh, we gotta run. So hopefully you got a safe and secure phone case by now. Let's go. To foreigners with no Japanese, buses in Kyoto exude with mysterious prospects of significance, each of them a decoding challenge. Let's say you're a non-Japanese person, like me, riding a bus in Kyoto, Japan, and you see this sign. If you don't know Japanese, you won't understand what this says, yet you do trust that it means something, that these lines and dots are arranged in a meaningful way. Maybe you know this because it's in an area where ads usually reside. Maybe you're like, oh, I've seen similar looking characters on Ariana Grande's hand. Whatever it is, you trust that these are words, or signs more generally, and signs always signify something. Now, as a person who is clueless about the Japanese language, these signs can be meaningless to me in 3 ways. 1, I may know who it's trying to communicate to, which are the passengers, but I just can't get the meaning. 2 is when I know what a sign means, but not who it's meant for. The author Leon gives the example of a foreigner's confusion with Japanese bus drivers, who take on and off their hat and bow every time they enter a new bus. Most foreigners recognize that removing a hat and bowing is a sign of respect, but what confuses them is why these drivers do it. Who is supposed to derive meaning from this gesture? The riders never bow back or react at all for that matter, so it's not really clear who's supposed to be receiving meaning from this action. In this case, tourists do not ignore what the sign stands for, but that whom the sign stands to. The last type of meaninglessness is what Leon calls uncanny meaninglessness, when both what it stands for and to who it stands to is unknown. Quote, riding on Japanese buses at night, one sees often bits of hemp string knotted to the railings. To most, if not all foreigners, such bits look meaningless, both in the sense of undecipherable, it is not clear what the strings stand for, and in that of incomprehensible, it is not clear whom the strings stand to. However, something in such bits of hemp string will still qualify and present them as signs. A reoccurrent bus passenger indeed will soon realize that 1. Only bits of hemp string appear, not of other materials. 2. They are always knotted around the same railings. 3. They are always knotted in the same way. Thus, although foreign passengers do not know either what these bits of hemp string stand for or whom they stand to, they will start realizing that their appearance in the world is patterned. Assuming we can't just Google the answer or ask a local citizen what the hemp signifies, the only way to associate the potential meaning of the hemp strings with an actual meaning is to do research ourselves. Broaden our experience by repeatedly riding the same bus at different times. Perhaps we ride the bus a few times in the morning, a few times in the afternoon, and a few times at night. Through repeated empirical observation, we will come to realize that the bits of hemp are actually remnants of leaflets tied to the bus railings in the early morning, which is why by night, only strings of it are left. Hence, the hemp strings signify that leaflets were tied here many hours ago. Although hemp strings seem to have zero connection to whether our lives matter, I actually think this example reminds us of how we recognize patterns in our lives in our search for meaning. Pleasure and pain seem to always follow certain acts. We live on an earth that somehow has all the resources for our basic necessities, and it feels like there should be meaning to that it can't be all complete randomness. But in order to associate this potential yet unknown meaning with actual meaning, we have to broaden our experience of the world. Just as how to grasp the potential meaning of the hemp strings, we had to broaden our experience of the Japanese bus. The more perspectives we learn about and take time to understand, and the more opportunities we seek to learn about ourselves, the closer we can get to the actual meaning of existence. What underlies all three types of meaninglessness is that meaninglessness is subjective. The Japanese signs in the hemp strings are meaningless to foreigners, either because they don't know the language, or they aren't familiar with the cultural environment, or both. But objectively, they're still meaningful signs. It's not like the Japanese characters and the hemp strings stop signifying meaning just because I don't get it. If I just learned how to read the Japanese characters, or if I gained more cultural knowledge, then the signs would become subjectively meaningful to me. Similarly, maybe our lives can be subjectively meaningless, we feel it's meaningless, but it's objectively meaningful. If this is the case, then having a meaningless existence is not the worst thing in the world. I may be lost right now, but I at least sense that there is some potential meaning to be uncovered. But what if we are unable to understand how to make existence meaningful? Or what if there are external barriers preventing us from achieving meaningful existence? This is no longer meaninglessness. This is insignificance. While meaningless signs have meaningful potential that can be dug out, insignificant things signify nothing to no one in no respect or capacity. Quote, "It is a transparency that nobody looks through, a letter that nobody will ever read, not only because it is written in a language spoken by none, and not only because it is enclosed in a bottle that will never be opened, but also, and above all, because nobody ever will recognize it as a letter." Because of this, we can only recognize insignificance in contrast with significance. Let's return to our bus in Kyoto. Many foreign visitors will be surprised at how many locals sleep on the public transport. Some might wonder if it's because Japanese people work very hard, wake up very early, or just spend lots of time on the bus and nap to pass time. However, a few others may realize from this experience of Japanese culture something about their own culture. Quote, seeing how easily and how commonly Japanese people fall asleep in public transport indeed will lead some foreigners to think, I would never feel comfortable doing that in the metro of Paris, or on a bus in Rome, or on Madrid's suburban trains. Japanese people fall asleep in public transport not only because they must, but also because they can. They can, for they trust their public space, they trust their society, they trust their fellow Japanese. Notice that the foreigner doesn't just learn why Japanese people fall asleep on the bus, because that's a transition from meaninglessness to meaningfulness. In this situation, it goes beyond the meaning of the sign in Japan. The foreigner actually learns the meaning of a specific aspect of public space in their own non-Japanese culture, and how their own cultural distrust of public space connects to larger social and historical systems. Passengers staying awake on public transport will stop appearing like natural behavior. Instead, it'll be recognized as a significant choice, a consequence of a whole social system that has a long history of violence and injustice, of centuries of hunger, poverty, exploitation, crime, all weighing on the shoulders of each passenger of the metro of Paris, Rome, London, Madrid, all whispering to their ears, don't fall asleep, it's dangerous. People staying awake on public transport was something they once never paid attention to. It just seemed natural. But now, suddenly, it's meaningful. It signals to a public distrust among citizens because of crime, which signals to the larger social systems of poverty and oppression. It's a passage from insignificance to significance. But it would have been impossible to have this transition happen without actually experiencing another culture. To turn insignificance, things we never even recognize as signs of meaning, into significance, we have to travel and experience different cultures and ways of life, or at least learn about it. Unfortunately, this presents us with a problem. Billions of people in the world do not have the means to travel, to get a good education and learn, to explore different cultures and ways of life. Or if they do learn, they can be presented with biased perspectives or face discriminatory barriers. I love this next passage in the paper. It's so beautifully written. Quote, to most human beings, pain, hunger, poverty, dirtiness, oppression, and violence are insignificant. They hurt, but naturally thus. For the child who has starved all his life, or the woman who has been beaten since she was a teenager, or the worker oppressed and exploited since she or he was an infant, pain is not a semiotic habit. It is an insignificant, mute condition of existence with no alternative horizon. If hunger, poverty, oppression were meaningless, people would know that it has potential meaning to uncover. It would mean that, under the right circumstances, we could try to find the cause of this suffering and eliminate it. But when it's insignificant, when it's something you experience your whole life, just as how the foreigner experienced people staying awake on buses their whole life, it becomes naturalized. There is no awareness of meaning. It becomes impossible to think that anything else but this suffering is available. Think of the foreign tourist on the Japanese bus again. The space in the public transport of certain European cities is unsafe, which is why passengers can't sleep on the bus. Yet, Europeans do not miss sleeping in public. They do not know it. They do not think about it. So long as they're not exposed to an alternative, they have little means to conceptualize the underlying meaning of their situation. Think about many 9-to-5 workers who are stuck in a constant cycle of sleep, eat, work, and social media. It perpetuates an endless banality that stops us from wondering, what does this mean? Who is it meaningful to? And how is it meaningful? Here's why Leon disagrees with many academics who claim that most of the world is meaningless. He says, no, most of us are surrounded by insignificance, and most of our lives are insignificant. We act without being aware of what those actions mean, who's supposed to get meaning from them, and in what capacity. But that's not really our fault, because certain ways that society is structured prevents a lot of us from achieving significant existence. Only the privileged few can say that generally accepted socio-semiotic habits are automatically rational. But just because many people don't think of staying awake in public transport as significant doesn't mean we should automatically accept it as the correct way to interpret the world. Just because owning slaves was once a semiotic habit, a widely accepted way of signifying social status, doesn't mean it's right. Not everything that is significant is right. And so we can't ignore the insignificant. People are starving from significance. They yearn for it when they sink in the irrationality of strong thoughts, embracing fundamentalism, superstition, and obscurantism. They strive for it through falling for the lure of consumption. They hanker after that golden existential moment in which they will finally believe that their efforts mean something to someone, and mean something to someone in some capacity. Semiotics cannot and must not teach the meaning of life. However, it can and it must warn about the death of meaning.
Vous êtes lassé de payer trop cher pour la mode? Nous sommes Privé by Zalando, votre site de vente privée en ligne préféré, avec des offres de mode jusqu'à moins 75%.
Then what the fuck is stopping us from just throwing ourselves off a bridge and giving up and saying, yeah, the planet is dying?
Postmodernism is cool and all, but there are legitimate concerns about its contributions to the death of meaning, or at least confusion about meaning. I don't want to explain what it is because I'll probably get it wrong, so I'll just let Plastic Pills sum it up here.
Bergson, Husserl, Heidegger, Foucault, Derrida, Fanon, de Beauvoir, bell hooks.
And so, as you can imagine, postmodernism is like, WTF is this modernism shit? Modernism is when science and or rationality and or religion were seen as the path to ultimate truth. The main point I want to stress in this video is that modernism believed in grand narratives. Everything that goes up must come down, the history of all societies is the history of class struggle, or all men are rude because they secretly want to stick it in their mom. But postmodernism was like, how about this perspective you're forgetting? Or this bias you have? How do they interact? Is there really one privileged truth position at all? One characterization of this shift from modernism to postmodernism is a shift from sincerity to irony. From this is the way things are to yeah, this totally is the way things are. Irony becomes the popular deconstructionist tool to poke holes in our ways of thinking. But irony is an entirely negative action. It keeps poking holes but leaves nothing new to fill them back up. It critiques but doesn't rebuild. Some think we need to bring sincerity back so that we have an overarching structure of our thoughts. Behold, metamodernism, a theory that doesn't see why we have to choose between modernism or postmodernism. Instead, we can constantly move between the two. We can bring back sincerity by being ironically sincere. 'Cause frankly, pure sincerity is now considered cringe. I think I touched on this in my video on Gen Z humor already, so I won't go too much into that, but essentially, some of the most effective ways of being sincere now are to be ironic. For example, BoJack Horseman explores some really dark themes, but with cartoon-talking animals living among humans in a colorful cartoon world. The creator, Raphael Bob Waxberg, explained, "The brighter and the sillier and the cartoonier we went, the more the audience was willing to go with us to these very melancholy places that maybe on a live-action show would have come off as indulgent or saccharine." I do not know how to pronounce that. I think this comment under my Gen Z humor video also captures the sentiment behind why ironic sincerity is now effective, but pure sincerity isn't. I don't think there is room for some things deserve seriousness, because every single fucking event that Gen Z faces is an existential crisis. we don't get the privilege of sincerity. As the comment suggests, being truly sincere can feel at odds with the absurdity of everything else. We live just to work and spend, to hear about misery around the world, and for climate change to ruin the earth until life is unlivable. We worry about our appearance, whether we'll find the right partner, all to suddenly lose consciousness one day and decompose away. This sounds pretty depressing, but what's a better cure than listening to some old men try to cheer us up? When I consider the short duration of my life, swallowed up in an eternity before and after, the little space I fill engulfed in the infinite immensity of spaces whereof I know nothing, and which know nothing of me, I am terrified. The eternal silence of these infinite spaces frightens me. One common reason why people feel that their existence is insignificant is just how enormous the universe is, and how tiny we are within it. I'm already an insignificant number in my university, so why would I be any more significant in the universe when I am literally like this? Ah yes, the age-old question, does size matter? Spoiler alert, it doesn't. If it were proven that God existed and he said, "You humans are special snowflakes," science wouldn't suddenly be like, "This just in, the universe is actually small." The objective value of our existence isn't affected by size. If we are intrinsically significant or insignificant, how could an external factor like size affect that? The author of this article quoted someone who was like, "Well, Sir Isaac Newton was pretty darn significant, but he was smaller than a hippo." So, it's true that sometimes we use size to represent value. For instance, it's hard to think of a religion that worships a super tiny deity. Usually they're infinite in size or beyond the realms of space. And civilizations tend to aspire to build humongous monuments. But this is because big things are psychologically more impressive and they take more effort to make. This size doesn't say anything about the intrinsic value though. As the author points out, few would prefer to have a huge pile of shit over a diamond. Another common reason for feeling like our existence is insignificant is because we're all going to die. Heck, there's a countdown for how long the human species has left on Earth. We study to work, we work to pay for our home and food, we pay for our home and food so that we can take care of ourselves and perhaps a family, but to what final end? It's a chain of actions that seems to never resolve in a final endpoint. Me working explains why I study, and me paying for my food explains why I work. But what's the big goal at the end of all this? If there isn't some ultimate end we're striving for, we must be insignificant. But Thomas Nagel says that we forget there are tons of chains of actions that end within our lifetime and are directed towards different goals. Not everything has to lead to one ultimate purpose in order to be justified. There can be smaller endpoints within a larger picture. For example, we take an Advil to stop our headache. And that's it. That's all there is to it. We don't bug our friend being like, "So why did you take the Advil? For self-actualization? For the good of humankind?" No, we probably don't think they need to justify that action beyond just wanting their head to stop hurting. I think these two reasons as to why people feel insignificant presents a view on the absurd that differs from Albert Camus' conception. Camus says that the absurdity of existence comes from a gap between our search for meaning and the world's lack of a response. But Nagel says the absurd comes not from a conflict between our expectations and the external world. Rather, it comes from a collision within ourselves. He says that for starters, humans can't help but take things in life seriously. We worry about what our family and friends and strangers think of us, how attractive our appearance is, what our career is, whether we understand the world, whether that burger was really worth $22. This is a special ability to reflect on ourselves. As humans, we can step back and evaluate our life from a more detached perspective, as if we're a spectator making judgments about ourselves. Yet simultaneously, we also understand that we can never actually escape this highly specific position we're in, namely ourself. However, when we view ourselves from this outside perspective, we realize how arbitrary our choices and considerations are. Sometimes I catch myself judging how even my eyeliner is for the 5th time, and I realize that literally doesn't matter. Even eyeliner being an attractive feature is so arbitrary. Sometimes I stress a lot about the grade that I get on a paper, and that outside spectator voice of mine tells me, Olivia, this paper grade does not matter in the grand scheme of things. In fact, you're going to die one day, so most things that happen to you will lose value once you stop existing. Yet, realizing how absurd our considerations and thoughts are doesn't usually cause us to just sign off with life. And that's the absurdity of it all. We can recognize how odd we act and think from this third-person perspective, yet still be invested in taking those actions and thoughts seriously, first person. This is why Nagel says human existence is absurd, but not, say, the existence of a mouse. Quote, he lacks the capacities for self-consciousness and self-transcendence that would enable him to see that he is only a mouse. If that did happen, his life would become absurd, since self-awareness would not make him cease to be a mouse, and would not enable him to rise above his mousely strivings. Self-conscious, self-transcendent mouse would be like, damn, I'm a mouse, and I can never be more than that, even if I want to. So, if you want to avoid a life plagued by absurdity, Nagel says just shut your brain off, act solely based on impulse, so that you tap into your head-empty animalistic side. Have fun dissociating. Now, this would not be a meaningful life. It's just no longer absurd. But it doesn't seem quite great? But hey, you avoided the absurd. This probably unpopular way of life is Nagel's way of suggesting that absurdity ain't even that bad. He thinks that